Dear colleagues and friends, thank you so much for joining us today to commemorate the academic life of Larry Weiskrantz. So this is an event, it's very important to us, organized by our Department of Experimental Psychology and also Larry's college, Magdalen College, where we are now. Larry came to Oxford as chair in psychology in 1967, to our delight and to the disappointment and chagrin of the other place, Cambridge, where he'd been for the previous decade and where he'd already established himself as a shining research star. He previously had obtained his doctorate at Harvard, supervised by Carl Pribram. Larry remained as head of our department until 1993, when Sue Iverson, who was his graduate student formerly, assumed that role. After that, he also remained an active presence in the department as an emeritus fellow, continuing to conduct research, to express his incisive intellectual acumen through scholarly articles and books. Unquestionably, Larry has left us with giant shoulders on which to stand. His accolades were many. He was Fellow of the Royal Society and of the National Academy of Science. His sharp and nuanced thinking, combined with great creativity and originality, changed, I would say, the landscape of experimental psychology. He pioneered an integrative approach, combining research in humans and animal models to address some of the most fundamental questions about the nature of mind, in perception and in memory. His breakthroughs disrupted the prevailing and intuitive views to demonstrate unconscious vision and memory, and he then endeavored to understand the mechanisms of unconscious versus conscious psychological functions, as well as their interrelation, and sparking endless philosophical discussions. But Larry's academic legacy reaches way beyond just his science. He also transformed the academic community around him. So today we have asked a few individuals who have worked with Larry at different times of his long career to give us a personal taste of the many and lasting contributions that he made to science and to the scientific community. So Dick Passingham, who's a Fellow of the Royal Society and an emeritus member of our department, was a postdoctoral fellow with Larry, and he will tell us about some of the blind sight research. And Mel Goodale, also an FRS and currently director of the Brain and Mind Institute at the University of Western Ontario, Canada, was also a postdoctoral fellow with Larry, and he'll tell us about the research on understanding the multiple pathways of vision and their relation to awareness. John Aggleton, also an FRS, currently professor of cognitive neuroscience in the School of Psychology at Cardiff University, and a former president of the European Brain and Behavior Society, EBBS, completed his DPhil with Dick Passingham at Oxford, so in a way he's Larry's grandchild. And he'll describe to us some of the research on memory, as well as tell us a little bit about Larry's role in founding the EBBS. And finally, Marco Tamieto, who's currently a professor at the University of Turin, was recently Larry's visitor in our department, will tell us what it was like working with Larry during the final years. In my own short reflection, I would like to emphasize the contribution that Larry made to our department and to the community at Oxford. So this is a piece about Larry as a gardener. In my view, the current guise of our department and its defining characteristics are a direct result of the seeds that Larry sowed on our ground. Here are some of these seeds. The caliber of individuals who Larry supervised and mentored is already evident from our other speakers today. There are too many amazing scientists to review exhaustively, but just to name a few, when Larry came from Cambridge, Alan Cowie also came with him. Alan was then already an established and renowned researcher in his own right. His decision to join Larry speaks to his respect for Larry and, most likely, their understanding that their partnership was even more effective than their individual scientific firepower. Alan remained a pillar in our department until he passed away. He exemplified the life scientific, fueled by genuine curiosity, carried out through rigorous experimentation, and shared with enthusiasm and friendliness. Many of Larry's graduate students and postdoctoral fellows were to become outstanding scientists and leading figures of our own community. This is not an achievement that many great scientists can boast. Whether he made his students outstanding or whether he picked the right people, who's to tell? But either is truly remarkable. For example, in addition to Mel, there were Sue Iverson, Nick Humphrey, Uwe Heinemann, Charlie Gross, on and on. Wow. After war, so another seed that Larry planted is just the breadth of perspectives that he brought to the field. After war had turned Larry from physics to social psychology, and then serendipity, Swarthmore, and Harvard landed him firmly in neuropsychology, Larry became neuropsychology and neuropsychologist through and through. But in building the department, Larry built a broad church. He built a strong focus in neuropsychology with Alan Cowie, Edmund Rolls, Jeffrey Gray, Nick Rollins, yet he also broadened the scope of the department beyond his own interests. So cognitive psychology remained a major strength with individuals like Ann Treisman, Mikkel Treisman, Pat Rabbit, Alan Allport. And when Donald Broadbent was retiring from the then called Applied Psychology Unit at Cambridge, Larry convinced him to join the department. What a marvelous coup that was. In sort of enriching and empowering developmental psychology, Larry created a new chair in the department, the Watts Chair, and used it to bring in talent in developmental psychology, first with Jerome Bruner and then Peter Bryant. And this strength is a tradition that remains today in the department with many amazing colleagues like Dorothy Bishop, Kate Nation, Kim Plunkett, Gaia Sharif, Kate Watkins, etc. He also continued to strengthen social psychology with Michael Argyle and colleagues. And this momentum continues to diversify and to broaden our department. So for example, now we also have significant presence in clinical psychology, such as through the world-leading work by David Clark, who's the current chair of psychology, the position that Larry held, and Anke Ehlers, which is the work that is transforming the lives of individuals suffering from debilitating psychological disorders. Next, Larry was someone who believed in big ideas. He did not follow in footsteps or follow scientific trends. He went after his own curiosities, inventing methods along the way. He made discoveries, he broke dogmas. His ideas were big, but also intricate and refined down to the very last detail. What an inspiration. We could certainly do with more of that individuality, originality, inventiveness, courage, and scholarship today. Here's, I think, a nice synthesis provided by Larry himself in discussing his views on the hard problem of reducing mental activity to brain activity in a relatively recent question and answer piece in Current Opinion. And Larry, when asked about whether he's a reductionist, he says, "I am an elevationist. I believe the nervous system should be elevated to be cast in neural and theoretical terms that do justice to mental activity." Next, Larry, of course, I already mentioned, pioneered the integrative research approach. Larry's approach of tackling the most challenging, baffling even, questions about mental experience through rigorous experimentation, including animal models, stands out. His integrative neuroscientific approach, so this is like a lecture slide from one of my prelims lectures that I used to talk about vision and sort of, not only did he use animal models, he also brought in methods of objective methods of experimenting on animals to animal research to understand vision and memory in humans in a much more objective and interesting way. And this integrative neuroscientific approach has become really a hallmark, I would say, of Oxford neuroscience and of behavioral and cognitive neuroscience at Oxford. We can see this clearly in our recent success in establishing the Wellcome Center for Integrative Neuroimaging, which is led by Heidi Johansenberg and involving colleagues from multiple departments across Oxford. But in addition to very firmly planting seeds in and building research, Larry promoted teaching and education. And in coming to Oxford, he negotiated the establishment of the final honors undergraduate degree in experimental psychology to run in parallel with the PPP, or Psychology, Philosophy, and Physiology course that was running then since 1947. And here, in his memoirs, he sort of exemplifies the different types of teaching that he fostered in the community. And Larry also planted the seed of what Dick calls coffee. Larry was inclusive and collaborative. He made our department international. He brought visitors like Hans-Luca Teuber and Endel Tolving when he was writing on the distinction between episodic and semantic memory to come and spend time in the department. And he set up coffee. The ritual of bringing people together over coffee, I believe, is probably as close as Larry gets to religion. For many years, at 11 a.m. coffee gathering was the focal point of the department, bringing together support and academic staff across generations to a common purpose. The coffee ritual started back in the late 1960s by Larry, and he describes it thus in an account when he's writing about the history of our department. He says, "A useful socialization experiment took place in the tiny kitchen common room. A coffee machine was installed, which was programmed to become free every weekday from 11 to 11:30 a.m. The queue stretched far outside the room." I'm sure some people here will remember this. Over the years, to our loss, the coffee ritual was diluted. Larry, however, was always there, in his later years often lamenting how the department and its members did not make time for that precious coffee experience anymore. "Larry, you were right. The many consultations and questionnaires as we build and plan the new spaces for our department for the future reveal just how much appetite individuals have for sharing their experiences and sharing ideas in a joint social space over coffee." Having recently been at the headquarters of Facebook, I was also struck by the vital force of coffee in social spaces in productivity. So this is Larry on his 90th, when we did have a nice coffee area celebration. But Larry was also committed to connecting people beyond the department. He instigated and fought valiantly against opposition of the likes by Linacre College to establish a cycle path crossing the fields from South Parks Road toward Headington. Larry also worked to enrich the the scientific community beyond the spires. And for example, he acted as deputy editor for Brain, and he founded the EBBS, but John will tell you about that. The final seed that I'll mention is that of the physical plant itself. In his memoirs, Larry mentions how the plans for sharing a new building with zoology were a real draw for him to join Oxford. He believed that psychologists should have adequate state-of-the-art facilities to conduct their experiments. He was the person who stewarded the department from its lodgings at that time in 1 South Parks Road into what has now come to be known as the Tinbergen Building. The Tinbergen Building was really an exciting place. We all know that it's kind of met an unfortunate fate last year and was closed for the discovery of asbestos in certain areas. But now, as we are immersed in envisioning and planning what our new space will be like, it's actually quite interesting to reflect that the Tinbergen Building which was designed by a prized architect, Sir Leslie Martin, was designed to achieve many of the exact same goals that we are prioritizing now for a new building. It had open, shared space for intellectual and social exchanges, extremely flexible space so that spaces could be reconfigured as demands changed, and had bespoke experimental spaces for all sorts of research activities. So here we are in this garden that Larry planted 50 years ago. I may be biased, of course, but I think it's just a wonderful place, full of color and depth, full of life, and with plenty of opportunity to continue the planting process. So thanks, Larry, for lending us these shoulders. So I'll just leave a picture of how I remember interacting with Larry when we had Alan Cowie as a control participant for an EEG study we were doing on auditory processing in patient DB. So now my colleagues will give their accounts and their perspectives, and I know that they will cover a lot of fascinating intellectual ground and that curiosities will be piqued, yet I regret that we won't be able to entertain questions during the talks, but of course we will have plenty of time for questions and discussions at tea and during the drinks reception to follow.